I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the oath every member of the U.S. military takes. Not to obey the president, not to follow orders blindly, to support and defend the Constitution. What happens when those loyalties conflict? What happens when civilian leaders order the military to deploy against American citizens? What happens when service members face orders they believe are unlawful? These aren't theoretical questions. Throughout history, military members have faced this dilemma. Some obeyed orders they knew were wrong. Others refused and faced consequences. The question is simple but profound. When do you have a duty to disobey? Welcome to Ethos Trek. I'm Sera, and this is episode 4, the last in the series, of Rights Under Siege, the Military, the Oath, and Unlawful Orders. Let's start with the law. What does the law say about using military force against American civilians? In 1878, Congress passed the Posse Comitatus Act. Here's what it says. Quote, whoever, except in cases under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or the Air Force as a Posse Comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both, unquote. In plain English, you cannot use the military to enforce domestic law. Period. Why did Congress pass this law? Because after the Civil War, federal troops were used in the South to enforce Reconstruction policies. When Reconstruction ended, there was bipartisan agreement that using the military for domestic law enforcement was dangerous. The law recognizes a fundamental principle. The military is designed to fight foreign enemies, not police American citizens. Military training emphasizes overwhelming force, battlefield tactics, treating adversaries as enemies to be destroyed. That's exactly what you don't want in domestic law enforcement. Police are supposed to be trained in de-escalation, proportional force, constitutional rights. Military are trained to neutralize threats. Mixing these roles is dangerous. There is an exception. The Insurrection Act allows the president to deploy military domestically in very specific circumstances. When a state requires help suppressing an insurrection, when insurrection makes it impractical to enforce federal law through normal means, when insurrection, violence, or conspiracy obstructs people's constitutional rights. This is a narrow exception. It's been invoked rarely. The 1992 Los Angeles riots, enforcing desegregation in Little Rock in 1957, and a few other specific cases. It's not supposed to be used against peaceful protesters. It's not supposed to be used because a president doesn't like criticism. It requires actual insurrection or emergency. Now, here's the crucial part. Let me read you the oath of commissioned officers. Quote, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter. So help me God." Unquote. Notice what's not in the oath. There's nothing about obeying the president, nothing about following orders. The oath is to uphold the Constitution, to the law, to principles. By contrast, enlisted members do swear to, quote, "obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me," unquote. But even that oath begins with, quote, "support and defend the Constitution," unquote. The Constitution comes first, always. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, otherwise known as the UCMJ, is clear. Military members must obey lawful orders, but they must not obey unlawful orders. Article 92 of the UCMJ establishes that following an unlawful order is itself a crime. Article 90 says disobeying a lawful order is a crime. So how do you know the difference? An unlawful order is one that violates the Constitution, violates federal law, violates international law, like the laws of war, requires commission of a crime. The UCMJ and military training emphasize you not only may disobey an unlawful order, you must disobey it. After World War II, Nazi defendants argued, quote, "I was just following orders," unquote. The Nuremberg Tribunal rejected this defense. The Nuremberg Principles established following orders is not a defense for war crimes or crimes against humanity. Individuals have a duty to refuse immoral or illegal orders. Quote, "superior orders," unquote, can be a mitigating factor in sentencing, but not an absolute defense. These principles are now part of international law. The U.S. was instrumental in establishing them. We're bound by them. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights establishes Article 3, right to life, liberty, and security. Article 5, freedom from torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Article 7, equality before the law. If military members are ordered to act in ways that violate these principles, targeting civilians, using excessive force, denying due process, those orders are unlawful under international law. Let's look at history. When have military members faced these dilemmas? What did they do? Let's start with Hugh Thompson at My Lai. March 16, 1968, My Lai Village in Vietnam. American soldiers, led by Lieutenant William Calley, were massacring civilians, women, children, elderly people. Over 500 people were killed. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson was piloting a helicopter overhead. He saw what was happening. He realized American soldiers were committing war crimes. He landed his helicopter between the soldiers and a group of civilians. He ordered his door gunner to fire on the American soldiers if they tried to harm the civilians. Then he evacuated survivors. Thompson reported the massacre. He testified against the officers responsible. He was initially vilified, called a traitor, received death threats, but he saved lives, and he was eventually recognized as a hero. Hugh Thompson obeyed his oath. He defended innocent people against unlawful orders, even when those orders came from his own military. That's what honor looks like. Let's talk about Kent State. On May 4th, 1970, Kent State University in Ohio, students were protesting the Vietnam War. The Ohio National Guard was called in. Guardsmen fired on unarmed students, killing 4 and wounding 9. This wasn't combat. These were American college students exercising their First Amendment rights, and they were shot by their own country's military. The Kent State shootings sparked national outrage. They demonstrated exactly why Posse Comitatus exists, why military shouldn't be used against civilians. The Little Rock Nine. September 1957, Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas. 9 black students were integrating the school. The Arkansas governor deployed the National Guard, not to protect the students, but to prevent them from entering. President Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and sent the 101st Airborne Division to enforce the Supreme Court's desegregation order in Brown v. Board of Education. This was a lawful use of military under the Insurrection Act. The state was violating federal law and constitutional rights. Military was used to protect rights, not suppress them. This is the distinction. Military can defend constitutional rights. They cannot be used to violate them. The Bonus Army. Summer of 1932. Thousands of World War I veterans marched on Washington demanding early payment of promised bonuses. They set up camps. They were desperate. This was the Great Depression. President Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur to clear them out. MacArthur exceeded his orders, using tanks and tear gas against veterans and their families. 2 veterans were killed. This was a shameful moment. The military used against veterans exercising their right to petition government. Lafayette Square, June 1st, 2020. Peaceful protesters near the White House. Federal forces and National Guard cleared them out with tear gas and rubber bullets. Not because of violence, but so the president, Trump, could walk to a church for a photo op. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was there in uniform. He later apologized, saying, quote, "I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics," unquote. Multiple military leaders spoke out against using military for domestic law enforcement. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said he opposed invoking the Insurrection Act. This was the military defending its oath, pushing back against misuse. After the 2020 election, there were discussions about using military to, quote, rerun, unquote, elections in swing states or siege voting machines. All 10 living former secretaries of defense, Republicans and Democrats, published a joint statement warning against military involvement in election disputes. They wrote, quote, "Efforts to involve the U.S. Armed Forces in resolving election disputes would take us into dangerous, unlawful, and unconstitutional territory," unquote. Senior military leaders made clear they would not participate in any such efforts. This is the system working. Civilian and military leaders defending constitutional principles. Why are we talking about this now? Because the threats are real and current. Threats to deploy military domestically. There have been repeated threats and suggestions about deploying military against protesters, political opponents, cities with leadership from the opposing party, immigrants and border enforcement, Antifa and other loosely defined groups. Some officials have suggested using military to conduct mass deportations, deploying troops to cities to fight crime, using military to suppress protests, invoking the Insurrection Act broadly. Each of these would likely violate Posse Comitatus and constitutional rights. When political leaders label American citizens as quote-unquote enemies, quote-unquote vermin, or quote threats from within, unquote, they are creating rhetorical justification for military action against civilians. This language is deliberate. It's designed to dehumanize, to make it easier to justify harsh measures. History shows us where this leads. Every authoritarian regime starts by identifying internal enemies and using military or police to suppress them. Loyalty tests. There have been efforts to purge military leadership of those deemed insufficiently loyal, install political appointees in key positions, pressure military leaders to make political statements, retaliate against service members who speak out. This threatens the military's political neutrality, a foundation of democratic civilian control. Militarization of immigration enforcement. Using military for immigration enforcement is particularly problematic. Immigration violations are civil matters, not criminal. Posse Comitatus prohibits using military for law enforcement. Military training is inappropriate for civilian law enforcement. This puts service members in impossible positions. If a soldier is ordered to separate families, detain children, or use force against unarmed immigrants seeking asylum, are those lawful orders? So, if you're a service member and you receive an order you believe is unlawful, what do? This is the legal standard. But first, understand not every order you disagree with is unlawful. You don't get to refuse orders just because you don't like them. An unlawful order is one that clearly violates the Constitution, clearly violates federal law, requires you to commit a crime, violates the laws of war. The standard is whether a reasonable person would recognize the order as unlawful. Some examples of clearly unlawful orders: fire on peaceful protesters, detain American citizens without charges or due process, seize voting machines or interfere with elections, conduct warrantless searches of civilians, use torture or cruel treatment, target civilians in military operations, suppress free speech or press freedom. These are clearly unlawful. Service members must refuse them. Examples of lawful orders, even if unpopular: deploy to the border to provide support, not law enforcement support. Provide humanitarian assistance during disasters. Protect federal property during riots. Enforce court orders, like school desegregation. These are lawful uses of the military, even if controversial. There are some gray areas. Some orders aren't clearly lawful or unlawful. They're ambiguous. What then? Military doctrine says: 1. Ask for clarification. 2. Seek guidance from your chain of command. 3. Consult with the JAG, the military lawyers. 4. Document everything. 5. If it's still unclear and potentially unlawful, refuse and request investigation. There are risks of refusing. Let's be honest. Refusing orders carries consequences. You could face court-martial, discharge, imprisonment, end of your career, social and professional ostracism. That's why this takes courage. That's why we honor people like Hugh Thompson. But here's the thing. Following unlawful orders has consequences too. You could be prosecuted for war crimes, face civilian criminal charges, carry the moral weight forever, destroy your own integrity. Remember, quote, following orders, unquote, is not a defense. What support exists? Service members who refuse unlawful orders aren't alone. There are military defense attorneys, JAG, veterans advocacy organizations, civil liberties groups, congressional oversight, whistleblower protections, though imperfect, organizations like the Military Law Task Force, Veterans for Peace, and others provide support. For senior officers, senior military leaders have additional obligations. They advise civilian leaders when orders would be unlawful, protect subordinates from unlawful orders, speak out when military is misused, resign if necessary rather than implement unconstitutional policies. Resignation isn't quitting. Sometimes it's the most powerful statement a military leader can make. When General James Mattis resigned as Defense Secretary, his resignation letter was a clear statement of principle. It mattered. This isn't just about military members. Civilians have responsibilities too. Ultimately, we decide how the military is used. In a democracy, civilian control of the military is fundamental. But that means we, the civilians, are responsible for how military is used. We elect the civilian leaders who command the military. We're responsible for holding those civilian leaders accountable for their choices they make. We do this by voting. Congressional oversight. Congress has constitutional authority over the military. It declares war, Article 1, Section 8, raises and funds the military, makes rules for the military, provides oversight. The House and Senate Armed Services Committees are supposed to ensure military is used lawfully and appropriately. But oversight only works if members of Congress have the courage to exercise it, and they only have the courage if we demand it. Although we recently saw Congress members who were also retired military speak out against unlawful orders. Trump threatened to have them arrested and executed for exercising their duty to speak out against unlawful orders. That has more to do with the courage of the military than the courage of Congress. Speaking out. When we see military being misused or threatened with misuse, we must speak out. Contact your representatives. Amplify the voices of military leaders who object. Support service members who face retaliation for refusing unlawful orders. Educate others about Posse Comitatus and constitutional limits. Supporting service members. If service members refuse unlawful orders, they need civilian support. Legal defense, financial support for their families, public advocacy, protection from retaliation. We can't ask them to sacrifice their careers for principle, then abandon them. Preventing misuse. The best way to protect service members from facing this dilemma is to elect leaders who respect constitutional limits on military power. Vote for leaders who understand military is for foreign defense, not domestic control. Dissent is patriotic, not treasonous. Constitutional rights apply, even in crisis. Posse Comitatus isn't optional. Questions for critical thinking. First, the oath. Military members swear to defend the Constitution, not obey the president unconditionally. What's the significance of that distinction? When might those loyalties conflict? Think about what it means to defend the Constitution against, quote, all enemies, foreign and domestic, unquote. Domestic enemies might include those who would subvert constitutional government. Second, Nuremberg legacy. Quote, I was just following orders, unquote, was rejected as a defense after World War II. What does that mean for service members today facing potentially unlawful orders? If following orders isn't a defense, then every service member bears personal responsibility for their actions. That's heavy, but it's essential. Third, civilian control. We have civilian control of the military for good reasons. But what happens when civilian leaders order the military to act against civilians? This is the ultimate test of the system. Does civilian control mean blind obedience? Or does the oath to the Constitution override unlawful orders? Fourth, your red line. At what point would you expect military members to refuse orders? What would you want them to do? What risks would that require them to take? It's easy to say, quote, they should refuse, unquote, from the safety of civilian life. But would you risk court-martial, prison, career destruction? What can you do? Immediate actions. Know the law. Understand what the Posse Comitatus Act actually says. Share this information. Many Americans don't know it's illegal to use military for domestic law enforcement. Support service members who refuse unlawful orders. Organizations like Protect Democracy and military justice advocacy groups defend those who uphold their oath. They need financial and public support. Document threats. If political leaders threaten to deploy military against civilians, document it. Report it to congressional oversight committees, media, and civil liberties organizations. Ongoing engagement. Contact representatives on armed services and judiciary committees. They have oversight responsibility. Tell them you expect them to defend Posse Comitatus. You oppose using military for domestic law enforcement. You support service members who refuse unlawful orders. You want hearings on any misuse of military power. Support veterans organizations that advocate for upholding constitutional principles. Veterans for American Ideals. Common Defense. About Face. Veterans Against the War. Military families speak out. Engage with active duty community. If you know service members, have respectful conversations about the oath and the duty to refuse unlawful orders. Don't put them in an awkward position, but help them know They're not alone if they face this dilemma. Long-term commitment, civic education about civilian-military relations. Many Americans don't understand why we have Posse Comitatus or the significance of the military oath. Educate your community. Support military justice reform. Ensure service members who refuse unlawful orders have due process protections and access to defense. Historical memory. Learn about and share story of service members who have refused unlawful orders, like Hugh Thompson at My Lai. Officers who pushed back against torture programs. Military leaders who opposed misusing troops. These stories matter. They show what courage and integrity look like. Universal actions: stay informed, follow military news and policy, understand when military is being used appropriately versus misused. Talk to people. Have conversations about civilian control, constitutional limits, and the military's role in democracy. Take care of yourself. This is heavy stuff. Rest when needed. I want to close with something General Mark Milley said in his farewell speech as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Quote, "We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America. And we're willing to die to protect it," unquote. An oath to an idea, to principles, to the Constitution. That oath is sacred. It's what separates professional military from armed gangs. It's what makes civilian control of military compatible with democracy. If we lose that, if military becomes just another tool of political power, we've lost the republic. We've covered a lot in this series. Episode 1, Due Process and Equal Protection in Immigration Enforcement. Episode 2, First Amendment Rights, Press Freedom, Free Speech, Religious Neutrality. Episode 3, Economic Justice and the Right to Survival. Episode 4, Military Oath and the Duty to Refuse Unlawful Orders. These might seem like separate issues, but they're connected. They're all about the same fundamental question. Do we have rights, or do we have privileges that the government can revoke when convenient? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has inherent dignity and rights. Our Constitution says government exists to protect these rights. Our military swears to defend the Constitution. These aren't just words. They're commitments, promises, obligations. But rights only exist if we defend them. The Constitution is just a piece of paper if we don't enforce it. Oaths are just words if we don't honor them. So here's my final challenge to you within this series. Pick one issue, just one, and commit to it. Not just liking posts on social media, real engagement. Show up to meetings. Contact representatives regularly. Support organizations doing the work. Have difficult conversations. Vote in every election, not just presidential. Help others understand what's at stake. You don't have to do everything, but you have to do something. Because here's the truth. We get the government we deserve. If we stay silent while rights are violated, if we're apathetic when democracy is threatened, if we can't be bothered to engage, we'll lose everything. But if we show up, if we speak up, if we organize and demand better, we can win. Rights under siege can be rights defended. Democracy under threat can be democracy renewed. It's up to us. Thank you for listening or watching this series. That's not the end of Ethos Trek. I'll be back in the next day or two with a new video. And next week, the beginning of a new series titled Above the Law, Congressional Ethics and Constitutional Accountability. If you like this content, poke the like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. Ethos Trek is still a relatively new channel with a small following. I'm not very high up the algorithmic priority list. Also, leave a comment. Keep the conversation going. Stay engaged, stay informed, stay hopeful. And remember, you have more power than you think. For Ethos Trek, I'm Sera. I'll be back in a